All right, we're going to be looking at some data that I think we just want to be aware of moving into the month of May and moving into the intermediates because, and I do apologize for not doing a live show this week for Dover. It just didn't feel well. You can still hear that I'm still sick, but I'm doing way better than I was. But I do apologize for the first no live show for either series in like a year and a half. Secondly, one thing that I was trying to talk about entering the week was that the way the schedule is and the way that April played out is really the only races that we had to look at entering this week was the Fontana, Phoenix, and Las Vegas, stint early in the year. And when you're looking at intermediate tracks, Auto Club was its own beast. Phoenix is clearly not an intermediate track, and so Las Vegas was really the point where we needed to look at. And I'm saying this both to let you know and remind myself that, hey, I probably should have been way more aggressive on the Las Vegas results. And I'll bring some stuff up on the screen in a second. But certainly entering the month of May, Darlington is a bit up in the air. I want to look at how these cars react in practice. I am concerned about a few things. We'll talk about that here. But when we get to Kansas, and certainly when we get to the Coca-Cola 600 later this month, I'm going to be looking primarily at Dover and just cross-examining how teams ran at Las Vegas and Dover. And I guess we'll just go ahead and kind of start breaking down the Dover race and the things that did reflect basically identically to the race in Las Vegas. And once we get from that, we'll continue to move on through the races and continue to move on and look at how we can apply that to why I think Kansas and the 600 is going to be the main races we want to focus on. And we can carry a lot of the stuff that we did learn this weekend at Dover to Darlington. Well, let's talk about the issues with Darlington first, then we'll talk about the Dover races and everything. So with Darlington, we haven't seen this car run directly against the wall. I mean, Darlington, you're going to be running the wall, okay? And so we haven't seen how the car reacts with the side force when you're running against the wall there the whole time. Dirty air is clearly still an issue. Were we watching these races? We're clearly seeing that this diffuser is not doing its job, and in certain instances it's making it worse. Kyle Busch was over the radio talking about how he could feel the dirty air at Dover from about 8 car lengths away during the run on Sunday before it rained. Once they got green and got spread out, he went over the radio and said, okay, it's right here. This is where the dirty air starts to happen. And so we're clearly seeing that it's still an issue. And at Dover, a track that's, a one-groove racetrack. Oh, but Brandon, they were searching around the track. Yes, I do. I understand that. But when we get down to it, look, they're searching around the track because they got lap traffic around the entire racetrack, okay? And sure, the rubber's being laid down, but you're having to search for different lanes there because you're just absolutely going through constant lap traffic. That was really the only places that we saw the leaders lose speed and lose the gap that they would create on second places when they'd start getting into lap traffic. And really the time to make passes were when they were in lap traffic. When you're by themselves and the leaders are by themselves, and you saw it specifically late in the race at Dover when, Stenhouse was trying to catch Chase Elliott, or even before that when you had, I believe it was Kyle Busch. Actually, I got to go back a little bit farther. When it was Ross Chastain and Martin Truex Jr., when those guys are Truex could not pass Ross Chastain the entire day. Now, yes, the argument is that, yes, Chastain had the better car, but still, when you look back at the race, and specifically the run between lap 130 and 150, when it's just Chastain and Truex by themselves, you're seeing that anytime Truex gets in the wake of Ross Chastain, he's just not able to gain ground. He's literally having to dime in the corners and exit differently to get out of the dirty air that Ross Chastain's car is causing. That's why, the argument's going to be made of, yes, there's multiple lanes at Dover, but it was needed because if you're running right behind the guy, you're not able to gain those positions. And we saw it when guys would get right behind each other, and traditionally you could, kind of bump them out of the way. Anytime you get right behind the guy, You know, the second car would almost have a bigger issue. Even if you move the guy up the track, once the guy gets by the wall and takes away the outside lane, you're not able to pass. And so the dirty air is still an issue. So entering Dover, I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about the tire wear that we're going to see at Darlington. I think that's a huge concern with how this car is reacting, with how these tires are wearing, and specifically with all four corners of this car being adjustable. Yet again, going back to the issues that we're seeing with, you know, going to an independent rear suspension. So you're having the right rear wearing more than what these guys anticipated. You're having the right front wear more than what these guys are anticipating, just by the way the cars are reacting. You know, and people forget that, look, Dover, we got two drastically different corners, and I'm not saying that in an analytical standpoint of, from like a TV booth, to being like, well, this track's a challenging beast. I mean it specifically on the tire wear. Like, entering, I believe it's, 3 and 4 is the tighter corners, and so when you're entering 3 and 4, you're going to be beside the wall anyway. But we're seeing that these tires are wearing way faster and way more than a lot of these teams are anticipating. I think that's a big issue. I think we're going to see bottoming out issues, specifically entering turn 3. You could argue turn 1, but the transition between the banking at Darlington is going to be really aggressive. You know, we've seen in the past that some guys have started running right at the white line or a little bit below it in the corners and then sliding back up the track. I don't necessarily believe that you can do that. We've seen how sensitive this car is to, you know, to bumps or fast transitions in the corners. And so there's a chance that if you truly enter this car on the bottom like we've seen in the past and want to slide up the track towards the wall, you might just slide completely into the wall. I don't think we're necessarily going to see that answered entering this weekend, just due to the practice session and the nature of that. And we're probably going to see cars spinning out. We're probably going to see guys get into the wall early in practice. Probably going to have some guys go into a backup car. And that's another thing is we're going to be getting guys on the wall here at Dover. And we're seeing that, yeah, sure, the outside of this car is not caving in, but we're seeing suspension components be broken left and right, whether it be the right front, whether it be the right rear, whatever the case is. If you're getting on that wall, I think it's a bigger issue this year than it was in the past. Unless you're getting on the wall and you're keeping that right front straight, if you have your right, if this is the body of the car, and if you're turning right just slightly and hit that wall at a bad angle, you're going to end up messing the toe up on the right front. And so that's why I'm very much interested in this month. I'm very much interested in taking the Dover data and putting it towards Darlington, putting it towards Kansas, putting it towards the 600. But I want to specifically put it at Kansas and the 600. I think Darlington is going to be a much more what we're seeing from the cars when they unload. Another thing that we've seen is that I truly believe that we can start trusting data. And let me go ahead and bring up, let's go ahead and bring up, we'll look at the lap by lap data for for Dover here. So this is not Darlington, for Dover. And when we're and this is really the tale of two races, and this is why I specifically wanted to enter this week, or wanting to enter Dover as if the race was going to go green. Now I understand we had the yellows for rain, I understand we had the single car spins, but this was not a wreck fest. This was very much a green flag race. This was very much, if you had speed on the long run, you could pull away from the field. You could pull away from the car behind you. And this is a perfect race to see where these cars are, to see where everybody is on speed, specifically right before we had the yellow with AJ losing the tire and during the green flag pit stops, whatever the case was. I forgot what caused this yellow here. But this yellow here is what trapped a lot of people a lap down who were having a really, really good day. This is a situation where we saw Speeda, Eric Amarola all day. You could argue that, and Keselowski was on a tire disadvantage here, but even throughout the day, Keselowski was staying in the top 15. That's good to see. A guy that I was very, very light on, very worried that we would end up having too much chalk on him. Got very lucky with Byron being trapped a lap down here when this caution came out. Another guy who really got screwed over by this caution period in the green flag pit stops was Ryan Preece. A lot of people, weren't interested in Ryan Preece, and I'm not saying he was the greatest play, but when we look at what he showed up in practice, and I think the practice data is really showing what these guys have with such limited practice data. You're arriving off the car, and you either have their speed or you don't, because most of these cars are going to be impounded after these practice sessions, and you can't make drastic changes. And so, seeing top 15 speeds out of Ryan Pearce in practice, him starting the race and having an engine issue, fearing that he was down a cylinder right off the bat. That's why under this yellow, he pits. They look under the car really quick. He goes back out and he starts dropping like crazy. He drops all the way back to 24th right before it starts raining. They understand that, hey, we're going to need to make some huge changes here. Whether it be we got to check at the ECU, we got to check if we have a electric issue, we got to check if we're truly down a cylinder. Whatever the case was, he pitted a ton on Sunday and entering the race on Monday. And you can see that he has the speed, and it's not necessarily this is Stewart-Haas car, but it's seeing that, look, we're seeing guys being able to replicate their speed in practice, okay? We're seeing guys being able to show who has fast cars in practice and being able to back it up in the race. When we're looking at Chase Elliott, when we're looking at Chastain, when we're looking at Stenhouse Jr., actually, let me bring up one thing real quick. Okay, so let's take a look at the practice data right here, and we both have the the averages, and you can actually look at each individual lap here on PA1. This is the stuff that I import following practice, and I usually have it up within 10 minutes of the practice sessions and everything. And we can see now clearly it combines both groups or both sessions, but you can still see the amount of laps and the amount of runs that some of these guys have that can show that they legit have speed. Like the reason and we'll talk about Pearce, we'll talk about Chris Buescher, and just guys that stood out to me of being like really interesting guys to look at, see how they perform in the race, then talk about the week later, is that like these are not just, one-off laps from Pearce. And I'm not saying that Pearce is gonna run for the lead, but when you see Ryan Pearce qualifying 13th and understanding that, look, he's most likely not going to have the top 10 car, but is he showing speeds that are going to be able to stay within the top 20? Well, then clearly, yes, it is. And then you start debating guys based on their salary. When we look at Chris Buescher, for an example, and typically I don't rely a ton on average speed here. I like to look at all these guys in general just to see what they're at. Is that the best? That was. Yeah, coming back at this like a week later, I'm like, okay, is everything looking good now? And I'm actually like trying to resell the idea of, hey, maybe you want to join the Patreon. Hey, maybe you want to look at this stuff during, Darlington, during this month. When we're looking at Buescher, like average speed wise, like clearly interrupted by a caution here, came back down pit road. Something happens here. Either the data doesn't pull or he's not on the track at this point, or he probably has an early pit stop actually, or he was probably in front of the start finish line. That's why we're seeing such low speeds on some of these. So I'm assuming he comes into pit here anyway, comes back out running speeds that are not dropping off completely, very much running the same speed at the line. And so when I saw him qualifying first, and I understand when you're looking at P1 rankings in general, and then when you look at the P1, where they're at in the 10, 15, 20 lap averages, whatever the case is, we need to put in perspective of looking at Dover being very much a track position type of race. Are they at least showing that their average speed is going to stay? And when we're looking at Buescher, it's very much based on pricing. Like you can argue this with Larson, Elliott, whatever the driver is. I'm just using Buescher as an example. When we're seeing Buescher, when you're looking at the rankings, okay, fine. 22nd at practice, that's concerning if you're just looking at the practice, if you're looking at where the ranking is there. But when you actually look at the lap speeds and see, okay, he's averaging at least the 13th best practice speed in general. Okay, he might not have the fastest time, on individual laps. He's ranked 22nd, but in terms of average speed, he's better than 2/4 of the field, better than half the field to start out with. And then you see him back the speed up in qualifying, and you see that Dover's going to be a track to where track position is going to be key. You almost want a car that's going to be significantly faster than the field. And when you look at it in terms of averages, you're looking at guys that are going to maintain speed up there. Like, okay, he starts first, had 13th best average speed, ran laps that didn't necessarily fall off right off the bat. I understand that it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 laps here. That was the longest that he ran, but you're not seeing a significant drop off here. You're seeing very consistent speeds, and you're taking into account that yes, Dover, you're going to be trying different lines. You might have a mess up here, but does he come right back? 155.3, 155.2. Oh, man, he was slow here, 154.6. Then he comes back and you see, okay, he got back in rhythm, 154.9, 155.2. So we're seeing the consistency from Buescher. And so that's why I was really leaning towards, and these are actually Pearce's projections here, but in my own projections, I saw him being able to stay in the top 10 all day. And so when we're looking at real rating and looking at where these guys are actually running it during the race, when you look at Chris Buescher, in my head, I'm like, okay, I'm assuming that he's going to run a majority of the laps, at least in the top 10. Let's see what he did there. Very much the case. 84% of the laps in the top 10, 94% of the laps in the top 15. And looking at to where it was very much a situation to where he would probably lead the first 30-ish laps, whatever the case was, and then get past at some point, did exactly that. When we're looking at Kyle Larson, the guy who showed tremendous speed, basically the best car in practice. When we're looking at how many laps Larson did, if I could just Control F here, and is my keyboard even going to work? What are we doing here? Why is the Control F not working? When we're looking at Larson, I guess this is more of a review from Dover. Otherwise, it's going to be like a 2-hour session, so I might do 2 videos here. Anyway, when we're looking at Larson, and same thing here, the same approach that I did with Buescher, this is why I like looking at the practice laps, not necessarily where they are in ranking, not necessarily where they are in averages, but what are the stories behind the laps? What are the stories behind what the car is doing, where they're at here? And so we're not seeing any fall off here at all. And depending on what track it is, I prefer to look at speeds or time. But Dover is a perfect one where I want to see the speed. It's very easy to see what's happening when they're at the line based on what he's doing out of 4 each time around. And so when we look at Larson, and we look at his race, despite the fact that he got wrecked, he spun out, had damage on the car, it's showing that, look, Larson's whole story this race, starts third, stuck in dirty air, has the best car right now. We see that Buescher's starting to fall through the field as he's getting past, and I forgot who leads following Buescher's pass here. And it's Hamlin. So Hamlin's showing. Hamlin has the fastest car right now because let's even look at Hamlin too. Then we'll get back to the Kyle Larson story. So when you look at Hamlin, you're like, whoa, man, why are these rankings so bad? Why is this just a Q lap? Is this just them practicing for qualifying? What's going on there? Well, when you go into the story and look at Denny Hamlin, where is he at in averages? What are the story? Okay, this is his fastest lap. I understand here this is probably a situation where he went out, and if you saw qualify or if you saw practice, and which is why I wish Fox would do a better job. But when you're watching Hamlin in practice session, you can see that he's getting tight loose on certain instances. I'm pretty sure this is the exact time on the broadcast to where you're seeing him get extremely loose, get uncomfortable, come back down pit road really quick, ask for an adjustment, come back out, and you don't see. I mean, granted, you're seeing, excuse me, you're seeing not as consistent speeds here. But when we're talking about like tenths of a second. We're talking about actually hundredths of a seconds between these lap times here. And so really, when you look at speed, you're really able to split hairs and see the stories here. But when you're looking at where these guys are in terms of what they're going to do, you project that Buescher is not going to he's not going to lead the entire race. Who is in line to pass Buescher based on who's starting around him? And it goes Hamlin and Larson. Who has the better lane here? Who's most likely going to be able to maintain the one groove racetrack that's Dover? Who's going to be able to maintain the one groove racetrack that's going to be at Charlotte? You know, these are the things that we need to keep in mind looking towards these races this month. Anyway, moving on. We look at, I think that's what I'm gonna name this podcast. It took a very long time. I think it's gonna be able to trust that we can. I don't know. Actually, I don't like that title. Anyway, moving on. You know, Larson clearly showing the best car. We're seeing that Elliott has the best car too. Maybe not necessarily on the short run because he did get passed, but that couldn't necessarily been just how the restart went. I haven't rewatched Sunday's start to the race yet. You know, and we have the issue. We have the red flag. Or they're just pacing under the rain. And then, they come back Monday. We're running through instances, and we're seeing that Larson is just having trouble here, and he spins out, gets damaged, blows the tire, trapped a lap down, gets the wave around on lap, or gets I forgot if he gets the wave around or lucky dog lap on this caution period here. How do I know that, Brandon? Well, at this point, we understand the guys that he's racing around. We're seeing that he's maintaining his position here. It doesn't move from, and I'm mainly doing this to show people how you can use this to tell the story of the race or a certain car or whatever the case is. And I apologize if it comes across to me talking down to you like you're stupid. I don't necessarily mean that. I'm just answering things that I've had questions, and really this last week, I felt so bad, man. I felt so shitty. I had a fever. I did not want to leave my bed. I didn't want to leave my room, and I had a ton of questions. I did my best to answer stuff, but I'm doing this to show how you can use this stuff and tell the story of what the race is doing. Anyway, so we're seeing that Larson is trapped lap down. He's not changing his position here. We're seeing that right now he's changing under green. Gets the lucky dog right here. Passes the field under yellow, and at this point, Larson is back in the game. He's gonna have the speed. He's gonna have the speed because it's showing that based on Larson's practice data, despite the fact that he has damage and aerodynamic advantage, he still has mechanical grip. He still has the setup in place and the average of the 7th best on time. That's why I'd love to look at average, but I don't like to just say, oh, he had the best average speed here, because we need to understand what he was doing in practice to cause that to be the issue. But in the grand scheme of things, for this example here, this is where you can be like, okay, Larson has an aerodynamic advantage. He literally has a hole on his hood that's going to slow the car down, but he's had a top 10 car in average speed, in just basic setup. So we can assume that Larson is going to show speed in the long run compared to the guys that are stuck running 20th, compared to the guys that are stuck running, 18th in situations like that. And so we get here, we have a yellow, and then we have the stage, and then so I'm pretty sure, I forgot if Larson pits here or not to gain the track position, but whatever the case is, Larson is able to start in the top 10. He has the track position, and so he's back to a situation to where he's racing around cars that are going to be where he's at. And so what is this showing here? He's 7th, 8th. Granted, it's with damage, but when we're looking at his practice speeds, he's showing that he's going to have a car that's going to run in the top 10, even with the damage. And so does Larson perform a bit better if he doesn't have the spin, if he doesn't have the damage, if he doesn't have to play catch-up for half the race? I think we can argue that. I think we can see that Larson would probably have the 4th best car. This is me inferring. Like, the data's not going to show that. The data's not going to show where everybody is in terms of, what they're doing. But you can see that Larson had speed in the car despite the fact even when it was spun out. The other guy I was going to look at was Denny Hamlin. When we look at Hamlin's race, and to be honest, I didn't play enough Hamlin. And this is not a week. I'm not taking a victory because I played 500. I got 429 back. So a loss of $70. But I'm looking at this to see, okay, we can trust what we're seeing from the practice data. We can trust what we're seeing from Vegas. And going back to Vegas for a very quick moment in time, when we look at the guys who had fast laps and laps led at Vegas, and in terms of as I said, we don't say the D word here, but in terms of hog points, and I got to thank Bixby for posting this, because he's doing his own stuff in his sheet as well, because Like, this is the type of stuff that you should be doing out. I mean, we give you guys the tools a lot, and we give you the, the past Dover races, and you can look through and see where these guys are getting laps led. But anyway, Bixby did this on his own and saw that, like, hey, look, it was very much identical in terms of who was there in this race, in terms of who was the contenders, in terms of who was showing speeds, in terms of who was showing the amount of fast laps and laps led totals here. This is nearly an identical situation here. Your top 3 drivers are right there. I understand that Elliott had a bad time at Las Vegas, but you still see that Truex is there. We still see that Larson is there. These guys are very much identical plays, very much showing that, or identical play, or at least identical in terms of, I think we could very much rely on this in terms of moving forward. And so, in case you don't want to look at the lap by lap data, or you don't necessarily enjoy looking through the race and seeing how guys did, and then seeing where they were in terms of their top 5 laps, in terms of their top 10 laps, in terms of their top 15 laps, in terms of their whatever the case is, if you just like looking at fantasy points and in terms of laps led and fast laps, it's very much the same here. And so, as I just said, Elliott had a poor day at Las Vegas. You could argue that if he doesn't have a poor day, since Chastain and Kyle Busch and Denny Hamlin are able to replicate what they did at Las Vegas, Martin Truex Jr. was very much able to replicate what he did at Las Vegas. We could argue that Alex Bowman was very much able to replicate what he did at Las Vegas, 21 fast laps, 24 fast laps. In terms of points, I understand Las Vegas had 267, Dover had 400 laps, but you're seeing poetry in motion. You're seeing guys that are doing what they did at the past races. We're seeing Christopher Bell, a guy who's able to get fast laps in these races. Now, granted, he stayed out, led laps there, but we're seeing that he's at least able to, even on a poor day, on a poor day, you're still able to project, Bell for at least, over 8 fast laps, give or take. Same thing with when you look at Bowman, 24 fast laps, 21 fast laps. These are things that I try and do in my projections. When I have kind of fast laps spread out throughout the field, this is the type of stuff that I'm looking at and expecting to see. And so now that we brought that up and we look at things that we can take and look towards really this month in general, I think that's what I'm going to call this. I'm still debating on the title. This is nuts. I'm going longer than I wanted to. We're not getting to what I necessarily wanted to do for Darlington. But in terms of the month, I think there's a lot of good things to see here. In terms of the guys who really got screwed during that pit stop, which is, that's just how it is, man. You sometimes get lucky with the pit stops. You sometimes don't get lucky with the pit stops. Where are we at? We're back here. Right? Am I an idiot? Yeah, here we go. So clearly we have the yellow here, and we're seeing the guys that are pitting, staying out. I mean, you want to talk about guys who finished better than they should? Let's look at the guys who got trapped a lap down, okay? And who really had a good race day ruined. So maybe this, burns people. This is the main reason why. And this, okay, in terms of watching lineups, I understand that the whole thing is like, oh, don't watch lineups. Don't. But look, TBH, I'm most likely offing myself before I get to 40, okay? So money is not necessarily an object that I view highly in. But I watch the lines and contests, and I pull the CVS data because I want to see what course of the race, what happens if these races go green? What happens if we don't run in this yellow here? Who's running well in these races? How are lineups being constructed for this in play to happen? And so that's why I'm always pretty much watching the contest and how they play out. Not necessarily to see how much I'm winning or losing. Granted, I hate just, either losing races, and I try not to freak out when I'm, in the top 10 of the big contests, but I want to see how these lineups are playing out, and this is a great example. So when you look at Eric Amarola, a guy who spent a majority of the day running inside the top 15, and you can see that by when these races go green and we're not seeing guys being dictated by what the pit or what the tire situation is or what the window is in terms of how close it is to the stage, he's able to hold his position. He's able to pass people. He's able to get there. Like, specifically here, I know I'm saying like, oh, he's able to hold his position here, but this is a run to where you have guys that are choosing to stay out. You have guys that are some of them either pitted here on the first time. If they didn't pit here and took the wave around, they pitted this time. And you're able to see that Eric Amarola is able to pass it. I'm pretty sure this is when Ty Dillon was up there. I think Ty Dillon was up in this one. Maybe it was the one before. Either way, you're seeing Eric Amarola have the speed in the long run. Hold on, I got to pause this real quick. Anyway, so we're seeing Eric Amarola putting himself into a position to run well, be there at the end. And so, you know, I don't necessarily give hate to the guys who look at lines. Now, granted, you know, that's why I don't get mad. I'm very, very much satisfied with my process, because with Eric running up there and being really overweight on the field, we were looking for a really great day. That's why I'm not even mad that I lost $70. It should have been way more if the amount of guys I had very much overweight on get trapped a lap down here, because I believe that Eric Amarola probably would have finished around 13th, 14th if this yellow doesn't come out. Byron, a guy who pits here, gets unlucky, trapped a lap down as well. Whereas Dylan was already a lap down, but he was able to pass the people who did get trapped a lap down here. And then, granted, he had to hold off, which he didn't necessarily do here. But you have Ryan Pearce. I talked about him earlier in the video, of the speed that he had, not the diversity, but the stuff that he had to overcome in the race. You know, showing speed, being there, you know, looking for pretty much. And another thing that I wanted to touch on Pearce really quick is let me bring this up. This is where I'm kind of interested in looking at old data, because his 18th and 19th here, now that's interesting, because all these were in pretty shitty equipment, to be honest with you. Were these outliers? Were these not outliers? Dover usually goes green. You know, it's usually dictated by how good you are in speed. Seeing that he was necessarily able to finish top 20 here that's why I'm mainly doing this video, to look at Pearce. Anyway, top 20 car, pits, trap lap down. Unfortunate for Pearce. And he's still looking at the people that he's racing against here. Granted, he gets past in the long run, but look at the guys he's racing here: Burton, Dillon, running in front of William Byron here. Like, Pearce was showing speed, okay? Now, I understand Blaney did not show speed at all. Clearly, Penske is struggling. We're seeing Penske struggle at Las Vegas. Remember when we were at Las Vegas and it was like, Las Vegas is a Penske track. Just look at the previous races. You see, Penske always does well here, and then Penske doesn't show up at Las Vegas, and everybody's like, why was that? And then they show up at Dover, and they're like, why is Penske not showing speed? Why are they not showing speed in the intermediates? Because that's just where they are in the intermediates, man. Like, sure, they're going to make changes. They're going to make improvements. But as a whole, we're seeing that Penske does not have the intermediate package down, or the intermediate tracks down, rather, because we're not running different packages. But really, you know, you have Eric Amarola, Keselowski, and then obviously Hamlin wasn't helped with him losing the tire. I won't necessarily count him, but Eric Amarola, Keselowski, William Byron trapped, Pearce gets trapped. We could argue Blaney. I forgot if Blaney was on the lead lap or not at the time. I'd have to go back. Excuse me. I have to go back and look at the race and see if 19th is on the tail end lead lap or if he's one lap down at the time. But these are a lot of guys who are running well who got hurt by this. Same argument can be made of guys who necessarily, which LaJoie was a very much a surprise here, and I think it was necessarily based on pit strategy, because he did not run in the top 20 all day up until that last stage. This is when it was raining on Sunday. But LaJoie, a guy who is just we're clearly seeing able to hold position, but not able to do much more than that. It's a difference like with Larson. Larson was able to yes, he would hold position, but then show the long run speed that we saw in practice. Whereas LaJoie would get out, in a one groove racetrack, kind of get spread out, but not necessarily be able to pass people. And then he gets passed by guys, so on and so forth. Anyway, he stays out, takes advantage, looking for a yellow during the pit period, which happens. Same thing with McDowell. McDowell has been notorious this year for just not being fast in these faster cars. Once they took the downforce away last year, it has severely hindered McDowell, which this is why I had to write McDowell off right off the bat, and I still stand by that. And it's just unfortunate that people start pitting and stuff, and he stays out, gets lucky, because once the pit cycles go through, he's still the slowest of the guys on the lead lap. He would have fell back down the 20s. He just couldn't. I guarantee you, if we're looking at where these guys are in terms of relative position and in terms of where they're at in terms of number of cars in line, I guarantee you McDowell is towards the back of the field, and McDowell is starting to get lapped here. Like, at this point, McDowell and Keselowski are on the same lap, and I guarantee you Keselowski was probably getting close to end up passing, McDowell, just based on Keselowski most likely staying closer to the leaders in terms of what their speeds are running. We have Bubba Wallace, Mr. How can I make people mad here? We'll look through his race here because he did start up front. Able to hold position, not necessarily showing the speed to pass people. Same thing here. Once you leave pit road, which is another reason why pit road is such an important component this year, is once you leave pit road, you just kind of run there on these intermediate tracks and even on the short tracks too. But here, not able to pass people at all, not showing speed at all. Gets lucky, doesn't get trapped a lap down there. Same situation, first car 1 lap down late in this race. But where would this have been if he was racing against Hamlin, Byron, Eric Amarola? These are the guys who were technically racing around Bubba Wallace. Maybe we see Bubba Wallace finish around 19th or something. Still, showing top 20 speeds, good to see. I think it'll be very interesting to see a race if Bubba starts 20th or 19th. I think Bubba can maintain that speed and possibly move up to 16th. But in terms of starting in the top 10, you got to project him to fall back a little bit. And even with the luck of, staying on the lead lap and not getting lapped, yeah. Whereas it was almost the opposite situation. I think Cole Custer gets the wave around here. I could be wrong, but Cole Custer's a lap down here. Cole Custer, honestly, a disappointing day in my opinion, which was my main concern. I put in the Discord, I was really worried about Cole Custer getting stuck running 28th, 29th, 27th. Worst case situation happens here. I had a shitload of Cole Custer. Absolute travesty. I was like, that was a whiff. That was an absolute whiff. But pit road strategy, determining when to stay out, when to take tires, just how the cautions fell, played into Custer being able to maintain the lead lap finish maintain the lead lap finish at the end, because he did not have the top 50 car. Let's even look at his speeds. I guarantee you he ran, before I even get there, I'm not even looking. I'm guessing Cole Custer ran less than 10% the top 15. And in the top 20, probably, I'm saying 27%. So let's look. 22% top 20, 8% top 15. And that just for me, watching the races. That just for me, watch the lineups and how they do, not even necessarily my lines, but I like to see who's leading at certain points in the race. I want to see what people are building, like the people in our Discord. Bixby was up there for a bit. We saw ACS up there for a bit. I like to see what players are up there when races are playing out a certain way. Suarez and Briscoe too. Briscoe didn't deserve this. He didn't necessarily have that type of car. Didn't show the speed all day. But it was based on where he came out of pit road. You just run where you're running in these races. That's why I'm 100% on board of using Dover, in association with the practice speeds for the Coca-Cola 600 later this month to determine how to make lines for the 600. Because I think Dover and Charlotte are going to race very similar. And don't just spreadsheet warrior and look at, oh, well, Hamlin, finished 21st. That's not very good. He's not in play there. Hamlin had the speed. These guys had the speed. Joe Gibbs is at least showing the speeds on intermediate tracks. Might be struggling a bit here and there, but I think they've as a whole understand where to go with this car. And so when we're entering Charlotte, when we're entering Kansas, it's the guys that I want to, for an example, like Outliers. If we see people showing up with speed in general, Buescher, Keselowski, Pearce, I think we can we can trust that stuff. We're seeing that Suarez and Bubba at least have top 20 speeds, and determining what they show in practice. They can show consistent pace in practice. We can see them finishing at where that practice speed is, and we can see that the guys who have been fast this entire year at intermediate tracks, Las Vegas and Dover, are backing it up. Las Vegas was not a fluke, okay? At the time, we're like, hey, maybe this is a fluke. Maybe this is early in the season. Maybe this is early with how these teams are looking at these cars, okay? But at this point, we've seen clear evidence to back up that Las Vegas and Dover go hand in hand, okay? And I think moving forward, granted, we're going to have a bit of a higher variance race at Darlington, but I think we can trust Las Vegas and Dover to look at Kansas and Charlotte. And I know I keep repeating that, but it's mainly just because I don't want to repeat it when we get to those weekends, because I want everybody to understand what I'm looking at, the places that I'm trusting. So we have Elliott, Chastain, Bowman, Larson, Kyle Busch, Denny Hamlin, Martin Truex Jr. These are the types of guys that are showing us speed, that are showing us that they have this. And long story short, I fully trust Las Vegas speed at this point. I fully trust Dover speed at this point. Entering this month of May, it's the intermediate month. We had the road courses and short tracks last month. We'll use that data when we get to places like New Hampshire, when we get to places when we're back at the short tracks. And the reason I'm saying that is because if we can trust this data for intermediate tracks, and I fully believe that we could have, trusted the Richmond and Martinsville data for both those, I think we can be able to use that short track data when the short tracks come back up, when the flat tracks come back up, when the road courses come back up. I think it's very much we're looking at specific intermediate data, we're looking at specific short track data, and we're looking at specific road course data, and I think they very much correlate with each other in terms of those track types moving forward. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. I'll probably do a Darlington preview video. I think this will nice intermediate data to trust. Maybe. I don't know. I'll think of the title soon. But thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting me and Pearce on Patreon. This takes a lot of work, a lot of energy, and I just want to say thank you for that. So, yeah, thanks for being here and hanging out and watching this. I do appreciate it.